Returned Missionary. Mason and his mission friends rented an apartment together without me. "I'm really sorry there wasn't room for you with us," Mason said over the phone before the semester began. "It was just tricky because I had a friend and so did Jones, and that put us at 6. I gave quick assurances that it was fine and that I understood. I rushed online to get an adjacent apartment with random roommates. My family sent me off with stern warnings about actually studying and not wasting all my time writing. I just want you to make sure you do well this year," Mom said. "It's so important you get good grades so you can get a job after school." I gave my standard non-committal response and promptly dove back into writing my fantasy series. I moved to Provo and began my new life. The following year was everything I ever wanted out of BYU. I absolutely loved, Provo and BYU campus. Nestled in Utah Valley, the campus stood at the foothills of towering, foliage-speckled mountains. A white, bold letter Y rested upon the mountains, visible to BYU, Provo, and beyond. The campus itself was small, being closed to traffic. Buildings of varied and interesting styles gave personality to the manicured grounds. My favorite building by a mile was the library, obviously. It was a proper library. Unlike USU's library, they had actual fiction books, and not just rows upon rooms of fire-hazardous, useless tomes that nobody had touched since the invention of Google. I was also rather taken with the Student Center, also known as the Wilkinson Center, or Wilk. That building had my favorite place to study, restaurant-style booths that overlooked a second-story balcony. I could spend entire evenings there alone, switching off between studying and writing. I was coasting into my future. For now, I ignored my fear of turning out gay, a fear that once made me suicidal. I avoided thinking about those dark, distant memories. Sure, I felt disheartened on occasion. Everyone did. But it was nothing like the paralyzing self-disgust I had once harbored. I had worked my way out of that mindset. My best option was to stay faithful and find a way to live in accordance with God's will. Luckily, BYU could help on that front. The Honor Code was a guardrail for my life, a yearly oath that every BYU student took, promising to live standards aligned with the church. This included the law of chastity, the word of wisdom, dress and grooming standards, and other guidelines like not staying in women's apartments past midnight. Such a system provided a welcome incentive to keep faithful and worthy. My future schooling depended on me qualifying for an ecclesiastical endorsement and keeping in good standing with the Honor Code office. The mountains, people, security, and campus combined into a perfect little utopia. A haven in a world that was far too big and wild for comfort. I dated and built meaningful relationships. I made dumb mistakes in playing with feelings, and had my feelings played with. Regardless of my dating disappointments, I had never been happier. BYU campus became home to me in every way. I learned the name of every building. That's not hyperbolic. I memorized a list of buildings and abbreviations. I knew every tree. Every nook and cranny of that blessed campus was my proving ground where I searched for purpose. More than anything, I felt lucky to be at BYU. The world was just beginning, and I was blessed enough to be handed the tools to the future. The teachers were phenomenal. I had never felt so much like a student. At USU, I had felt like a customer. But BYU was a place of learning, and I threw myself into my studies. I had always been smart, but never the best student. I needed to justify my presence among the academic elite. My grades had improved drastically since my USU days, when I spent all my time writing. I still spent all my time writing, but my grades were up regardless, granting me plausible deniability to time mismanagement. I discovered that school became more interesting if some of my classes were adjacent to my writing ambitions, like marketing and web design. I was financially stable. Enough. Financial security had always been a foreign concept to me. An ironic part of my childhood is that my siblings and I always thought we were poor, despite literally growing up in a mansion. Dad excelled at making us believe our lives were unsustainable. The money was drying up, we thought, and the ritzy lifestyle wouldn't last. Well, he was right about the lifestyle, but not because the money dried up. His financial gaslighting, combined with my mission in India, left me with anxiety about spending money. I made a game of seeing how cheaply I could live. My apartment cost an astronomical $330 per month, so I tried to subsist on $400 flat. Most months, I even reached the goal, provided my meals were microwaved potatoes. Things were perfect. That's why the thought of my roommate making meth came as such a surprise. Yeah, that was a weird week. I came home to an apartment that reeked of cat piss. Mark had been cooking again. He always did this. He spent just 2 days a week in the apartment, staying just long enough to cook a bunch of nasty shit and leave the kitchen a wreck. But the smell never went away the last time he visited. To make a long story short, he lit his room on fire and put the flames out with his garments. He then left the apartment in a panic, pushing past me on his way out the door. We later found a bunch of bottles and chemicals in his room that the police speculated could be a homemade meth lab. We moved into a new apartment across the courtyard. Apartment management bought us all a few boxes of cereal, and then resigned the next day. Rumors spread through the campus like wildfire. My roommates and I found ourselves in the news, and under public scrutiny, with a surprising amount of vitriol leveled against us. It seemed all anyone on campus could talk about for the next month. Life went on, but when Mark self-surrendered to the police, hearsay quietly distributed a new rumor throughout the ward. Mark, so the rumor said, was gay. His frequent extended trips to Salt Lake City had been to stay with his boyfriend, which is where he was when learning the police had issued a warrant for his arrest. Fellow ward members discussed his being gay in hushed whispers. I always knew it from the first time I saw him, Mason said. I guess it just goes to show that you really can't let your guard down. It's a slippery slope to that kind of lifestyle. At least his spot in the school can go to someone more deserving, though. His roommate said, a lot of people would kill to get into BYU. I stayed silent during those conversations. Mark was gay. He had started the year so solid, a nice guy. Then he started leaving for days on end. He would come home to manic cooking and study sessions, then leave the apartment a mess, and repeat. His concoctions became a bit weird near the end, finishing with this last disaster. How had it happened? I couldn't understand. Surely it had nothing to do with being gay. There must have been other factors. Even so, the fear boiled up inside me. Despite my conviction to marry a woman, I was profoundly discouraged. I had tried. I went on many dates, of which I will spare you the dry details. Nothing ever felt right. Women just out of reach always felt the most alluring. Once they came closer, I realized I wasn't interested. In retrospect, I can't fault any of the women who rejected me that year. Except for that girl who let me pay for a breakfast date before getting engaged the following week. She can choke on the muffin I bought her. Worry nagged at me even then that I would reach the end of my ability to press forward in faith. I was a glitter-wrapped time bomb, just trying not to trip and make a mess. I needed BYU, even though I knew I was reaching the end of my rope. I could not stay here long term, but to leave was unthinkable. It would set me back in my schooling, isolate me from my friends, and limit my career opportunities. I had loved every second of my time at BYU, and there was no reason to leave because of hypothetical future actions. Plus, I needed a place to guard against slipping into a gay lifestyle. But Mark had done the same thing, and it hadn't helped him. The school year ended. I had earned the best grades of my life, even while taking my most demanding classes and continuing my progress in writing. Mason and I planned to sell pest control in Oregon. It took some research and bouncing around to find a company and location we liked. I called Mom to tell her the plan. I sat on a bench outside the testing center. Hey, Mom. So I think Mason and I have figured out what we're going to do for money for next year. I thought you already knew, Mom said through my earphones. Yeah, but the plan sort of changed, I said. I think I'm going to sell an organ now. Silence. You're going to sell an organ? It's probably not the most ideal plan, I said, somehow feeling awkward. I just think it's a good opportunity. I don't understand why you would do that, Mom said. What happened to your last plan? We didn't end up liking the company, I said. And we need to pay for school somehow. There must be other options, Mom said. Are you angry? I asked. Yeah, I'm a little surprised, honestly, Mom said. I don't understand why you care what we do to pay for school, I said, growing indignant. It's kind of my choice if that's what I want to do. We can pay for your schooling, Mom said in anger. There's no reason for you to go out and sell an organ. He can't sell an organ, my stepdad said in the background. That's not even legal. What the? Why are you both responding this way? I asked. They had either lost their minds or were playing a joke on me. It's not a big deal. Why does it make any difference to you if we're in Nebraska or Oregon? Silence. Was she crying? Mom? I said into my headphones. She burst into audible laughter. You're going to sell in Oregon. Yes? I said, thoroughly whiplashed. So you're not selling your organs? Now it was my turn to burst into laughter. 5 minutes later, I asked, So you good with the new plan? Thrilled, Mom said. Have fun, and don't sell your organs. That depends on how desperate I get. Mason and I moved to Oregon for the summer. Selling door-to-door sucked. 0 out of 5 stars. Do not recommend. Would rather sell in Oregon. We lived in Albany with 25 other sellers, hawking a product that was definitely BS to homeowners just trying to pay their mortgages. I put in the work, but my heart wasn't in it. Mason became fast friends with someone else, Caden. Their friendship annoyed me to no end. They were just so close. They gamed together, crawled into bed together in the morning, and ripped each other's towels off after they got out of the shower. One day, Mason came home telling Caden about Mark, my old roommate. They were both sprawled out on the floor, half-dressed after a long day of selling. Mason tossed his hat across the floor and stretched out diagonally in the living room. I don't know how it happened. He just started down the wrong path, I guess. I just don't get it, Caden said. I think even gay people would have to admit that liking dudes isn't natural. It's obviously a perversion of something pure. Yeah, I know what you mean, Mason said. You can't justify that's normal, but they're just like, oh, Caden said in a feminine voice. I like men. I like it when guys stick their penises in my butt. Mason slapped Caden's butt. The two laughed. I grabbed my shoes and left the apartment, going for a run. I liked to run, or at least I liked appearing athletic. After a few blocks, I stopped, sitting on the curb across from a rundown gas station. I wasn't tired, I was sick, realizing with defeat that my anger was jealousy. Jealousy of their friendship, and the ease with which they slid through life with so little friction. My breaths came in belabored gasps. Everything asked of me, I did. I had gone above and beyond the call of duty, hoping things would get better, but they did not. I had never talked about it, never told anyone. We didn't talk about feelings and shit in my family. In fact, I was incapable of talking about anything difficult. I walked home along the banks of a river path in Albany. I returned there often throughout the summer to walk and be alone with my thoughts. I had been lucky enough to travel a lot in life, but this was the first time I felt on my own outside of Utah. Halfway through the summer, I had told a customer I was from Utah. She looked at me with sympathy and said, I'm glad you were able to get out of there. I was so shocked that I smiled and said, thanks. I had tried to do things right since getting home from my mission, but the summer had been so isolating for me that I was beginning to feel that trapped sense of dread from my childhood. Nothing was right with the world. I felt heavy and tired. Simple actions required conscious effort, and each day hit me like a steamroller, pressing me into mud. I had options, sure, but each possible future made me want to vomit. An easy way out lingered on the periphery of my thoughts that I tried to ignore. But I hadn't been suicidal since high school. Those thoughts weren't worth entertaining. I prayed daily, twice daily if I could remember. It had once felt so easy to brush against that infinite mind of divinity when praying. But I had lost something in the last year. I felt alone in my thoughts. My daily failure to feel the Spirit left me exhausted. For reasons beyond my understanding, God had withdrawn, leaving me alone. And alone in my mind, there was only one truth. I was gay. It wasn't changing and may not even be avoidable. This brought me a measure of peace, I guess you could call it. I had done all I could. I had tried for years with no tangible progress. This was a rigged game. Victory was every minute I didn't give into the flesh. Defeat took only a moment of weakness. But was it defeat? Maybe it was just me, and maybe that would be all right. Something needed to shift. It was no longer an option. I needed to learn about myself and be okay with that. Perhaps I would marry a woman, perhaps not. But the past year hadn't gotten me any closer to finding that answer. I needed to date, and not just because I was supposed to find a wife. I needed to figure out what I wanted. That meant dating women and giving an actual, honest effort. It also meant dating men, perhaps. Or maybe just meeting other gay people. I wasn't so sure, but I knew there was progress to be made. The summer was wrapping up, and while my plan for the coming year frightened me, I felt a stronger sense of direction than ever before. Trying new things felt like my best next step, and for the first time, I would be honest with myself about my feelings. That should have been a monumental decision that changed my life for the better. I never would have thought that it would make everything much, much worse.